Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hub for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters.
Hi there, I'm Susie Asley, mindfulness coach, mindful therapist, musician and mother of 3 teenagers, 2 of them are twins.
Now, I get a lot of emails, and a recent one had a massive impact on me because the mum is so lovely. Mm-hmm. She's a professional. She's working so hard, but she was also very vulnerable in it and covered so many of the things that we parents struggle with. And with her permission, we're going to talk about it in this episode.
Brilliant.
So thank you. I won't name her, and I'm going to try and keep any sort of identifying detail out of it. On the topic of emails, because it's just me managing them, I'm always going to prioritise the ones from listeners, because that's basically all I really care about, if I'm honest. But I do get people pitching guests, and sometimes it's something that I'm really interested in. So I say yes. Mostly, I don't have time to deal with them. One woman has contacted me repeatedly to ask if I'd like to talk on the show about vaginal gymnastics.
Oh,
she
would you like
to be an avid listener. I'm not really convinced that she's listened to this podcast. Because I'm not sure how she thinks that's going to fit in with our material. But since you do listen, thank you so much for reaching out. But I don't think it's really one for this show. What do you think,
I don't know.
Susie?
I mean, I think we should keep an open mind. I don't know a lot about vaginal gymnastics, so maybe I should.
I won't even go into the words that she uses, but I just, maybe just completely separate, like subscriber only. Just as it's a different podcast. We could just do a different podcast.
Yeah, maybe that's not appropriate, is it?
Okay.
That's so funny.
Now, I just wanted to mention before we go on to this email, in the interview I did with the young adult mentor, Ken Rabo, he hit on something that I think is really important for us to understand with our teens. And he mentioned the acronym FOMO, which is a fear of messing up. And he says this comes up all the time with these young adults who are failing to launch, who are struggling. I've definitely seen that a lot. The fear of messing up stops our teenagers from trying things because if they don't try it, then they can't mess up. Yeah. And I think if you've got a teenager who doesn't want to do certain sports, who doesn't, who just isn't engaging, behind that very often is a real fear of being shamed.
Yeah.
And not being good enough, because then if you don't try, then you can say, well, you know, I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So just that empathy and that understanding that that's a major thing for teenagers.
Yeah, because we're obsessed from when they're tiny as being good at stuff, aren't we? Like you have to be good, or you're good at that, do something you're good at. And then they think they have to be good at it and they can't not be good at it. But
also they're surrounded. If you look at Instagram, okay, I'm going to start playing the guitar. You go on Instagram or you go on TikTok or any of those things, it's full of people who can do extraordinary things on the guitar. So then you're like, well, what's the point? What's the point, right? Tennis, what's the point if I'm not, going to...
So true.
Right? So it's actually really... We need to be aware of this and be talking to them about it and saying that's not something we're aspiring to. And I think schools make it worse because when it comes to sports and things, they just focus on the tiny creme de la creme, who often are the big kids who started school in October and September. And then the rest of them get sort of quite quickly left on the wayside and they feel like they're not worth it. Yeah. It's really
hard
damaging.
For them to understand that the people they see maybe playing that guitar on TikTok also started and they couldn't play to start with.
No, quite.
It's hard to understand that.
Yes. So in this particular episode, we're going to talk about, there are things that she covered. So one of the things we can talk about is styles of parenting, authoritarian, authoritative and permissive, I'd like to touch on. Wanting possessions as a way of feeling like you fit in and belonging. The importance of our values, celebrating our own culture, and then the way society makes us think about bettering ourselves and how that can impact on the way we parent subconsciously, because we just don't want to get it wrong, do we?
No.
So you have one chance. Sorry, just before we move on, I met a woman on a train once and she was homeschooling her kids and she had a range of kids, really right down to a little one. And I said, oh my goodness, you really have your hands full. And she said, yeah, I just keep getting better at this. So I thought, why stop?
Amazing.
All right, I screwed up the number 1, but you know what? By the time I get to number 7, I'm going to be amazing.
I had a conversation with my eldest the other day or a while back, and we were talking about the benefits of being the first kid, against the less beneficial bits of being the first kid, and he's the guinea pig.
I know.
I have tried, so I'm really sorry, I tried everything out on you, and some of it worked, some of it didn't.
Yes,
and he's
exactly.
like, great, thanks.
Exactly. But for Stephen and Fleur, who I was talking to the other day, the question they asked was, at what point is it too late? My answer was never, ever, ever is it too late. Because if you continue, and Ken Rabo mentioned that. He just said, you're not a bad parent if you're still in the game and you're still trying.
No.
It's the ones who give up.
I was watching something the other day about, adults mending relationships, 40-year-olds with their elderly parents, mending their relationships. Yes. It's never too late.
It's never too late. And it's never too late for them to start studying, for them to change their life. No. We can all do this.
Especially
so
our generation.
Yes.
It's never too late. Never.
Absolutely. So coming back to this email, we mentioned her in the last one of the shows where it was, I adore your show. I felt really lonely in my struggles as a parent, and you really changed that. Oh, okay. Yes. So my daughter always struggled academically, but she really applied herself aged 11, and she was so keen to get into a good school. We can all relate to that. Her, yeah. We got swept up with her enthusiasm and applied to posh schools, which is what she refers to them as. Yeah. They couldn't really afford them. Yeah. She's had sleepless nights over it. It turns out that they basically can't afford the school. This 2 years on, can't really afford this schooling. I can completely understand and relate to how they got into that position and how hard that must be. But this girl is one of 3. She's also stopped working. So she's not joined any clubs at the school. She's doing the bare minimum. She says studying is for nerds. Her aspiration is to marry a rich man, which is really disheartening when you're working really, really hard to put your child into what you hope would be a really great school, and then you're getting this. Okay. They've tried to get her a place in a state school, which is actually I've heard this from other people, where it's not that easy. You actually have to, it's quite a long waiting list.
Depends
for some
where you
schools.
live, doesn't it? Yeah.
Depends where you live. And the daughter is also really upset about it. She doesn't want to move, obviously, and she feels quite snobby about the state schools. This listener isn't actually English, and nor is her husband.
Right. That's tricky, isn't it?
Yes. So this is why my heart went out to them, because, all of those things, made me really feel for her. But it's also sort of living in a country where it's not really your cultural background. This happens to a lot of people. I think a lot of our listeners are in this situation. And you're trying to figure out what's important in the country you're in. Like, what are the values I need, and what how do I fit in? Yeah. And I've had another lady contact me about this who's Middle Eastern, and she said, she's struggling with this as well.
Yeah, I think when you live in a foreign country, I lived in a foreign country for years.
Yes, you've experienced this.
And they're quite similar countries. So that's, it's not as contrasting as maybe it is for them. But you kind of lose your sense of, or it's easy to lose your sense of what normal is, because you're kind of faced with contrast all the time, and faced with stuff that you didn't even know you did as a cultural thing. Yes. You just thought you did it.
Yes.
And then suddenly you're like, oh, they do it differently here. So therefore what I've been doing is cultural. Oh, that's interesting. And it all gets a bit foggy and a bit blurred. And when you're talking about stuff for your kids, which we're really sensitive about, and these parents sound like they're doing everything they can to do the best for their kid. And it's a bit like sort of, I don't know, running around in the fog, isn't it? It's hard. It's really challenging.
And I want to add to that I think we parents now are almost all parenting out of our culture, because what's happened is it's shifted so quickly that we're now parenting children who are online. We didn't know how that worked when we were kids. It's a very different style of parenting. And we can try and be separate from all the other parents around us, but it's very hard.
Yeah, I think we all are doing that. I think it's 10 times more challenging for someone who's come from a different country and a different culture. I think it's,
of course. But I want to say that actually I think we're all suffering a bit of this, where we're looking around going, wait, how does this work?
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter how you were brought up. You're going to be going, well, actually, this doesn't, I'm not sure I was equipped by what happened before.
Absolutely.
Right?
100%.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to kind of zoom in on this, because I think we can all relate to this. She mentioned that her husband finds it hard to say no to her daughter. Again, apple of his eye. They've got 3 kids, though.
Yeah. I think we can all relate to that.
We can all relate to that. But here's the thing that I thought when I when I heard that, that made me think, and the daughter, I didn't mention it, she now wants an Hermes bag for her birthday. Yeah, you're like, I don't know, what is that?
What is that?
What does that even look like? It's an unbelievably expensive bag that, you know, is touted around as being, and it's so funny, I looked it up on social media, and it was, you know, should I buy my 14-year-old this Hermes bag she's asking for? And this fashionista said, yeah, I mean, if you can afford it, she'll keep it for the rest of her life. No, she won't. She's 14. She's going to spill orange juice in it. It's going to get stolen. She'll leave it on the train. She'll leave it on the train. You know, like, this is not... It's so there's that, but also, just as an aside, if you're going to buy stuff, okay, you've got a certain amount of money. Here's my thinking: jewellery.
Yeah.
Jewelry. Do you know why? Because people in the war could sew jewellery into the hem of their skirt and escape. It saved people's lives. This is why people like and value jewellery, because you can hide it, you can trade it in a way that, like a Hermes bag is, you know, if everything goes wrong, it's about as useful as a Waitrose shopper bag.
And it's a really good opportunity to have the conversation, isn't it? With the child of explaining values and money and all of that, because obviously then, you know, they you know, that would be a bit crazy. I'm not going to judge people who've done it, but in my opinion, that would be a crazy thing to do. And to explain it to this girl, it's really, really, really good opportunity. But we have to be clear on our own values, don't we? And if we feel our kids are struggling, if we feel that they're in the fog and we're kind of trying to feel the ground underneath our feet, where are we? How do we help? How do we do this? And we're doing the best we can. Then we don't always see clearly, and we forget what our values are. So it's a really good opportunity both for the parents to stop and go, okay, what is important to me here?
Absolutely.
And then to communicate it and learn with their daughter. They can do it together.
Yes, absolutely. So looking at it going, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Why doesn't this feel right? What is it about it? And where is she getting these values from? Because what's happened is she's obviously in an environment where these seem to matter. Yeah. But we have to, we can only parent with our own values. Yeah. And because otherwise, if you're trying to clothe yourself in someone else's values, none of it's going to, it's not going to fit. No.
And we can do the classic empathy thing. We've talked about this before, haven't we? I completely understand why you want that bag. It's lovely, and I can see maybe your friend's got one. I totally understand it. We are not going to do that.
Yes.
But I'm not going to shame you for the wish to have it.
I completely agree. Don't shame them.
With, you know, that I can see why you want it, and we're not going to do it.
Yeah. But also, just what does it represent? Yeah. So trying to help them to think through why it is so important to them, because they probably don't really know that it's actually an attempt to fit in, because they can see the other girls are talking about these things and they've adopted those values, and they feel like that will make them more popular. They'll be in with the popular crowd.
And the empathy
and what that means.
At that age, I don't know how old this girl is, but then it is really important. You know,
it feels vital.
So important. So it's having empathy for that as well. Yes. It's not like there's nothing wrong with her for wanting that bag. She's not a spoilt little brat, you know, that we could quickly think.
No, exactly.
She wants to fit in. She wants the bag that maybe her friends have, and there's nothing wrong with the wish and the desire, and we're not going to do it.
Exactly. And I think coming back to the values, I have actually written a course, still haven't recorded it, but that goes through all of this, and it's going to be cheap as chips, because, you know, well, when I first launch it, just so that people, because I really, really think this values thing is so important, and it's so hard to get right, because I don't think there's enough information about it. And coming back to this whole...
And we have different values. So,
exactly.
You know, their friends, her friends, family maybe have different values, and they're cool with it, and that's fine for them. That's also hard for a teenager to understand. Yeah, but why not? That's unfair, you know. But really, you know, experiencing her parents standing by their values and being wholehearted with them is a really great lesson for her.
It's such a great, and it gives you an identity. See, I think this is circling around the real issue here. When you have values, it gives your family an identity. So you say, the Richards family have these values. This is where we sit. And being able to explain them and identify them makes it easier for them to say, oh, well, I see this. And you say, well, that doesn't really sit well with my values, and here's why. And you don't necessarily, like you say, you don't ever shame them. You just say, okay, so because what's also happening here, and she actually mentioned the book, and I've talked about it before, is she's becoming much more closely identified with her peer group than with her family.
Yeah, because of her age. Yeah.
Because of her age. But this is actually, there's a book written by Gordon Neufeld and Gabor called Hold On to Your Kids, which is exceptional about this. And I'll put it in the podcast notes. Absolutely love that book because it's talking about how critically important it is to hold your kids within a family circle of values as long as possible. And it's not letting them grow and try experiment with the things. It's being really clear about who you are as a family so that they feel anchored in something that's meaningful.
Yeah, and then things that come up, they're easy to answer because we're not firstly searching for our own opinion on it. We know already and we can go yes, no. But that's where the challenge really comes in, isn't it? Because for many of us as adults, we actually are still wondering what our own values are.
Yeah.
And it's finding out them first.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us haven't always done that work.
Well, I think most of us, and that's why I wanted put this course out. But the other thing is what sort of parenting are we looking for? And we've heard all these words like helicopter parenting and free range and everything. But actually, I did a lot of research into this, and it's basically authoritarian parenting is not what you want because that is telling them they've got to do this, and this, and it feels horrible.
It's old, isn't it?
Authoritative parenting is what we're looking for, where it's a balance between having boundaries that are consistent and clear and that love and that nurturing responsiveness. And then the other end of it is permissive parenting, where what you do is it's child-led as opposed to child-centered. And I think the problem we've got in the society we're living in, particularly Western societies, is that because we're kind of trying to reset the pendulum from some of the more authoritarian parenting, a lot of people haven't found where that middle ground is, and they've slipped into permissive parenting where the child leads the way. And what we want to try and do is edge back away from the permissive parenting where the child gets to say, this is what I want. And the parent goes, oh, okay, then.
Yeah, I can feel I'm reacting to what you're saying.
You tell me. Go tell me. Disagree with me.
I kind of agree with what you're saying. I do agree with it. And I think it's really difficult to put it into boxes like that because I think it does depend very much on the individuals. And that's a kind of a bit of a wishy-washy answer. But I genuinely think that. And I think to say that we all are going to be geared up towards a particular way of parenting, I think it brings a lot of problems because that doesn't work for some people.
What doesn't work for them?
Well, to say that we shouldn't be doing the permissive or we should be doing a particular way of parenting, because for some people that will work and it will be fine and their kids will be wholesome, healthy, and it will work. You know, you see it. And for some it won't work because maybe they're doing it differently or they're not really wholehearted behind it or they need a different way. They need more structure because we are all very, very different. I think we really do have to sit with our own values, our own history, our own cultural, societal history, sit with that and decide how do I want to be and be flexible with that and go from that space rather than going towards a particular model. I
think that it's undeniable that we need warmth and responsiveness and that we need boundaries. Without those two things, the parenting's not somewhere. The parenting's going wrong.
But you can have permissive parenting and have boundaries. It depends how you define it, doesn't it? It depends.
I think that depends what. Like I think if you're like
permissive,
to me, permissive parenting is a lack of boundary. Like you're not actually saying no. You're not.
Then to me, permissive parenting means that you're taking that you see the children and the parents as not hierarchical, but you have boundaries within that.
Right. Yes.
So that's different.
I'm talking about it's actually really important as a parent to be able to set boundaries so your child can see where the edge is.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think but
a child can lead within that sometimes.
Yes. But what we need to do is we need to have conversations with, particularly when they're teenagers. You can't say, this is how it's going to be. No. You can say, this is how I'd like it to be, and then have a conversation with them about it and a discussion. So sure, absolutely. But I do think
it's a matter of definition.
Has to stop with us parents. Yeah. We do have to say, and I'll say to my daughter, I know this is annoying, but you'll thank me later. Isn't it awful you have a parent who loves you enough to say that's not going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of definition in that case. Then, so permissive to me is that everybody's involved in the conversation around it. We have our boundaries. The children have boundaries within it.
Difference,
and it's sometimes it's child led, sometimes it's parent led. But the buck stops with the parent, definitely. Rather than all trying to go towards the same model.
Yes.
We can have our own models within it.
Yes. So it's critical that you're all having discussions and that you're listening to them for sure. But you end up having to say, look, I have to make this. This is how it's going to work.
And some families will be more permissive and what was the middle one you called?
There's authoritative. Authoritative is the thing to aim for, which is basically that balancing it, being being responsive. Like if they need things, so it is that. It's having conversations with them, listening to them, showing them warmth and love and all those things. But at the end of the day, you have to give them some boundaries. You have to say, well, that sounds great. Like you said, I understand that sounds wonderful, but that's not going to happen. Yeah. And that's fine because I'm the adult, I'm the parent. And as they get older, that shifts. Yeah. But it's having those in place. Yeah. So the coming back to her sort of her game plan, which was she's going to marry a rich man and she doesn't actually want to work. Again, I've heard that. I've heard my daughter come home and say, "Oh, this girl said that's she doesn't care because her parents are good, they're really rich and she's just going to marry a rich man." And I just think it's so. I feel so sorry for these kids who feel that way. That's the sort of game plan.
Yeah, but we also need to remember, I think that. That's maybe that's her absolute belief, and then maybe that absolutely needs a conversation, and let's have a look at what you mean by that. But it could just be a flippant comment, couldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd really like to eat cake for dinner for the rest of my life. Yes. She's not going to do that, is she?
Or maybe she's, her parents have said, "Have you done the homework?" She's like, "No, I'm just going to marry a rich man."
Yes. So we need a bit more context. But maybe if it is a real belief, then then that's not ideal. But
it's not ideal, and
it's again be a flippant comment.
Yeah, so it's about unpicking it, and I think the interesting thing with this girl is that she's the first, and you've got parents here who are immigrants, and they are hardworking parents. And one of the comments
they sound amazing.
They are like she really, really moved me when she wrote in, and one of the comments she made was she said, "I'm from this society where there's a lot of wealth inequality." And I'm ashamed of having things. So it's really curious that her daughter is going the other way where she's acquisitive because again, she's in a different society. And she said, and my husband comes from another country and we're ashamed of that country because of its past. And
so these things are really triggering for them more than maybe otherwise, which is really understandable.
But I also said to her, so I can understand how you feel that way. But I remember doing this for Parent Gym when I was coaching parents in inner city London. And most of the people I was coaching were immigrants. And they taught me so much. And I absolutely loved meeting each and every one of them because often the parenting styles from the countries they came from were very different. But one of the things we did as an exercise was we would actually create a scrapbook of the culture that they came from. So, the extended family that may be still living in that country, if there was no extended family, things about that country and that culture that were very positive. Because I think the problem is we come to a new, there are people in countries where they get really cross because the people come here and they don't adopt a culture. Of course, you need to adapt to the culture of the country you move to, but you also need to harness the wonderful things about the place you come from because that is who you are. That's your genes.
And a recognition of what you've come from. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Like you live in a foreign country, which I've done. The culture was very similar, but still. And suddenly all your little things that you celebrate in your own country, suddenly they're super important. That's just one example. Whereas maybe you didn't even celebrate them like when you lived there. But now you don't. You're like, well, this is really important. This is who I am. And so when you live in a different country, often it can go both ways, but often it's even more important because of the contrast and the lack of familiarity around you. It's so important.
And I just think that if you've got a girl, so I think all teenagers are searching for identity. And my kids used to love telling people that I was born in Africa and I grew up there when I was younger. And sometimes they say, well, I'm part African. Of course, they're not because I'm completely English. But what's really interesting is they're all searching for identity. So actually making it into a positive and giving her information about her heritage that is a positive thing, that's not oppositional to the culture that they are moved into, but that actually
is an addition for her. It's an extra.
Yes.
It's
so let's say, because I don't want to identify them, but let's say the husband's French. And, you could say all sorts of negative things about the French. You could also say they make the best baguettes in the world. You could say that, like the cuisine has always been amazing. Whatever you want to do that picks out something that's wonderful about the French. They came up with some of the best couture in the world. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, there are negatives to the country I come from, but there are also some really wonderful things. And you're part of that. Yeah, and hand that down to your child as something they can be proud of, that they can tell their friends. They can say, oh, well, I'm, rather than being ashamed of it.
Yeah, and maybe have a conversation with them, her as well, that, that there's some stuff that they're struggling with their own identity.
I think that's a really good thing.
Because that she'll really understand that, and then maybe there'll be more understanding for where some of the, the more complicated feelings around it come from, because she'll be picking up on it.
Yes, she will. And also that will make her parents seem more sort of human and real than I think often our kids look at the parents and they're like, and if they can see your humanity.
Yes. I struggle with that part of my identity, and what do you think, kind of thing. Have a conversation around it.
I completely agree with you. And also just the fact that she's the oldest, but there are two siblings and they're struggling to keep her in this private school. And I think one of the ways, so she's really angry, doesn't want to leave the school, but they can't afford it. It's too much. These schools are so expensive. And, you could argue that there are huge benefits to it. I didn't go to a private school. And it's hard to switch from coming from privilege to not. So I came to England and we had nothing. So we really became quite poor. And as a teenager. So I understand how that feels. But actually, it was the making of me. It was hard, but it was the making. And I would regroup as a family and say, you know what? We've realised that actually you're really important, but then so are your siblings.
Yeah.
And as a family unit, we can be stronger if we pool our resources in a different way and have conversations about it.
And she wouldn't want the parents to be suffering because of it. Like if they explain it, so this is a team, we're a team,
We're a team.
And this is really not great for whoever it's not great for. She might resist, of course, but she'll get it.
And I love that because I use that a lot at home when I'm trying to get people to do chores and things like that. It's always talk about it as being in a team, because I think then they feel valued, they feel important, rather than being told they've got to do something, because that's when they start fighting back, isn't it?
And it's really hard because we want the best for our kids, and it sounds like these parents, they absolutely want the best for her. So maybe it's really challenging for them to go, do you know what, we can't do this anymore, because they maybe feel like they're letting her down, or they have a different narrative about what being a parent is. But maybe that it's all linked.
It's all linked. And one of the other things she mentioned was that her daughter hangs out with some kids who seemingly have no manners. They don't greet her when they enter the house. They start eating before they've sat down. Sounds like a lot of teenagers. But this is quite an English thing as well, because we've talked about this before when we talked about manners, haven't we? Where they sort of try and sneak in around the back door. Yeah. And in other countries, that would be completely verboten. I mean, France, again, they have a very set routine for going into a house. So it's about expectations and having conversations about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're saying it, or just going up to the teens. That's what I do. Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
People in the house.
Yes.
And who are you?
Yes.
Oh, hello. My name is... And they're always lovely after you've done that. Like, they just don't realise. They just don't know.
I think they don't know.
Teach them.
Yes. And I actually think sometimes we look at these kids and we think, oh, they're so rude and they're entitled. But actually, if you encourage them in, and rather than thinking, I need to teach them how to do this, you can say, hey, how do you do things? Oh, you do it like that. Oh, well, we do it like this.
And rudeness and awkwardness are often mistaken for each other.
Uncomfortable.
They're not being rude. They just don't know what to do, and it's all a bit awkward.
So you can just say, hey, come and say hello.
Yeah.
And then you can go off and do that.
And do you know what? We're just going to wait till everyone's got their plates. Is that all right? Do you mind? No, no, of course not.
Yes,
exactly. That will be the response.
Exactly. Just a gentle prompt rather than, because it's hard otherwise, isn't it?
It can also be quite lonely being foreign in another country.
For sure.
It's super lonely because you don't have the same antennae out. And for some people it's lovely and it all works and it's fine. But so, these parents, they need to cut themselves some slack as well. They sound like they're doing an amazing job.
That's spot on. So I think this lady needs to give herself a pat on the back for doing an amazing job. She does a day-to-day job that's very hard, and regroup as a family. Yeah. What do you think? Any other things? No. That's it. If you want any more information, if you want to contact me, it's teenagersuntangled@gmail.com. If you want to contact Susie, what's your email address?
Or my website is www.amindful-life.co.uk. You can find me on that.
Perfect. And if you want to sort of search through any back episodes or anything, it's www.teenagersuntangled.com. They're all on there. I've got a blog that I intermittently update. That's it for now.
Bye for now.